Welcome to the Main Character Podcast, where we share a collection of personal stories to create a community and inspire real conversations. I'm your host, Brooke Taylor, and today's main character sharing her story is Casey Conley. Hello.
Hi.
Welcome. I'm very excited to have you.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. So my name is Casey Conley. I'm 21 years old. I am an Oceans College student. I've been going to Oceans Church for about a year. I am a singer, a songwriter. I love to read, write, passions of mine.
Did you grow up in California?
Yeah, I grew up in California. I grew up as a pastor's kid in California. So I moved from the Inland Empire to Orange County when I was about 10. Tensions just started kind of like rising in my family. And it really just like changed my family dynamic. And then in about 8th grade, I started going to public school, and I was very different from all the kids that I went to school with. I was like, I'm never going to have sex until I'm married, and I'm never smoking weed, and I don't want to drink alcohol until I'm 21. I had like all these things that I really wanted to do and who I wanted to be, and all my friends were the exact opposite of that. They were sleeping with each other in 8th grade. They were all going out and drinking on the weekends. They were all doing drugs. They were all smoking weed. They were just very different from where I had come from. So I had already found myself some like pretty bad influences from an early age, but I always thought like, oh, like if you are around them, you can influence them for the better. So I'm thinking like, oh, I can bring them to youth group and like things like that. But it never really works out that way.
You have these friends in middle school, then you go into high school.
Yeah.
Do you have the same friends?
So yeah, kind of. I slowly like drifted apart from certain people in that group because they made fun of me just for being the way that I was. And so that kind of just like started something in me where I didn't really like the way that I had like set myself apart because I wanted to be a part of them. So instead of like, trying to like find people with like-minded values, I just sort of shrank down to the level of conviction that the people around me had because I thought it would be way easier to fit in than to stand out.
Were you able to balance your values and like what you were doing before with like your mindset of faith and how you were raised to then now you're hanging out with these friends and you're changing who you are to fit in?
I was pretty good at like living like that double life sort of thing for a really long time. So I started like really compromising freshman year. I started going out, trying this party lifestyle. And I mean, my parents were super strict, so it wasn't like I was able to really stay out late anyways. I'd be out till like 10, but I'd be like, I'm going to get wasted before like 8:30 so that I could be like pretty much sober by the time I get home. It never really worked out that way, but my mom would cover for me a lot because she saw just like how much stress my dad had been putting me under. He was very legalistic, so it was all like the law aspect instead of being combined with grace. It was all law, so there was no like common denominator in the middle. It was just you do this or you're a bad person. And so I was trying so hard to keep up with just this impossible standard, realizing that I can't, and then just kind of like succumbing and then going up on Sundays and singing on stage, just pretending that I was just like this perfect little girl with like her perfect family and I'm the pastor's daughter. And so it was not exactly, there was no balance there. It was just completely polarized.
I think that happens a lot with just Christians in general, where they like spend so much time following God's rule or like these laws, and then they think it's up to them to like judge others and say, well, you're not held to this high enough standard. But in that act, they're creating like they're sinning just as much as what they're saying the other person's doing. The whole point is not to judge.
You're right. It is really hard, and you end up just becoming a hypocrite in and of itself. It's just impractical because God empowers you and gives you strength in your weaknesses. But if you're not turning to him because you think you're not good enough, that's when you just end up going down that rabbit hole of I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. And it just starts this like almost downward spiral.
So is that like, did the idea of you're not good enough come from your dad?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't think he ever intended for that to happen. I think he really just wanted the best for me and my brother. He was always like pretty hard on both of us, whether it was with sports or academics. He always just believed that we could be the best. And I think a lot of the time that really just like scared us. And it just like put this fear in us that if we didn't do enough, we didn't score high enough on tests, or if we didn't do well enough in our sports, then he wouldn't love us anymore. It was like this idea of almost like conditional love. And I don't think that was the case, but as a child, you respond to the things that you're fed, and you believe the circumstances that you're going through. It's all perception based. So it just created this perpetual dissatisfaction with myself. And I felt stupid, and I felt like I just was never good enough, especially getting made fun of in school. I was never skinny enough. I was never pretty enough. My skin wasn't clear enough. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't athletic enough. I wasn't kind enough. It was just like this whole world of you're not good enough. And I think it really did start with the idea of like not being fully embraced at home.
Well, and then if that's like your little seed that's planted, then, because if you already had a seed of you are enough, then those other things at school would have not affected you that way. But I think our mindset is whatever we believe about ourselves, then we pick and choose what we feed into and say, okay, yes, I agree with this. So then you go into high school.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
First, it was like pretty like innocent. Well, not really like innocent, but it's like, you know, you go out, you drink a little bit, and then you like come home, and it was never something where it was like, oh, that's concerning. It's like, okay, you're in high school. And I'm not saying like that's a great thing to do in high school, but it is fairly normal, especially nowadays, to like go out and like party a little bit. And most of the time people don't go too crazy, and like they'll kiss a boy and like, oh, it's good. And then like they end up coming home. My sophomore year, that was when I started drinking more, and I'd be like, I'd like wake up in the morning, I'd be like covered in throw up and like things like that. It wasn't like innocent teen drinking anymore. It was kind of like drinking to numb something. And like I became just like this bottomless well that was insatiable when it came to intoxication. I had like started smoking weed, and it wasn't just like, oh, like I smoke weed like every once in a while. It was like I smoke every single day because I otherwise can't eat. My anxiety is too high. I feel like I'm an alien in my own household. I just wanted to feel like accepted, and with that, it made me just kind of forget about the whole idea of acceptance, and I just was like enjoying life as it is. I was almost like in my own little world. I just like really wanted to escape, and I didn't know like how to, and I didn't have an outlet to escape to. So when I got this boyfriend that coming year, entering, I think it was my junior year, I started just like slipping on my grades because my parents were fighting a lot. My mom and my dad just had like this horrible relationship, and they just pretended like nothing was wrong for a very long time. And so I would go on FaceTime and I'd talk to this boy all night long, and in my brain I'm like, this is perfect. Like this is what real love looks like. This is what I've been waiting for. This person loves me a lot more than my family does, clearly, because they care about me. They care about the way that I feel. They care about the way that I'm accepted. They care about the way I feel about myself. And so I really just fed into that narrative and would always be talking to him. And I ended up losing my virginity to him. And that's where things just like really kind of went off the deep end.
And then you meet your boyfriend junior year at school?
No, he actually lived in Huntington. So I was in Laguna Beach and he lived in Huntington. So it was like a long distance thing. It wasn't like that long distance, but I don't think I had my license at the time.
Okay, so then you're dating him.
Yeah.
And you start having sex with him.
I only had sex with him one time before my dad found out. So my dad found out the very night it happened. My brother was sneaking out and just doing all this stuff. And like my dad's one rule was don't let him in after he's been out. And it was probably like 3 a.m, and he had been pounding on the slider for maybe like, I don't know, 45 minutes, and I had just gotten sick of it, and I was awake because I couldn't fall asleep, so I let him in, and my dad takes my computer, there's no password, he looks at my messages, and he just finds out. And so that was where like I had all these deep rooted things that like ended up coming to fruition later on come up. He was obviously livid. And it wasn't like I'm going to correct you out of love. It was I'm going to correct you out of, I can't believe you could ever do something like this. How could you do this to me? He was like personally offended by it. So he called me a lot of names, called me just like a lot of names that had to do with like the idea of me just being a whore and not being pure and like not being good, and just saying like all these really, really awful things to like clearly to hurt me. He was just trying to hurt me in the way that he felt hurt by the circumstance, which was really unfortunate, and it made me feel even worse. And it was like, oh, of course this happens. Like, yeah, I'm like, again, I'm not good enough. I never was. So like, that's fine. Like, I guess I'm just going to continue to act the way that I feel. So that was kind of like where I found myself. And I was grounded after that for probably about 7 months. And during that time was when I really started like taking pills and being like really secretive about just like the way that I was living. I felt like I was spiraling out of control. I found myself like very deep in an eating disorder because that was the only means of control that I had. I couldn't go out. I couldn't spend time with friends. I could go to Starbucks to study my math homework and for tests and different things, but other than that, I wasn't really able to do anything. So I found control in other outlets.
What happens to your boyfriend?
We are forced to break up at that point. Yeah. And so I had my phone taken away. I had no access to any technology. So we were technically broken up and like forced to be broken up, but I had memorized his phone number. So I'd call him on my friends' phones during lunch and things like that. And he'd come to see me at school. He would ditch school to come see me. And it was like, my strict parents had taught me just how to be sneaky and not how to be honest. So that was kind of just what ended up happening with our relationship.
And now they're taking away control, so you're finding it in other places.
Yes. I would just like rummage through cabinets and I'd find like literally anything. I was so desperate to just be like not conscious. I would literally take anything. Like it did not matter what it was. I didn't care if I got caught because it was like, what are they going to do? Like ground me? I'm already grounded. And like, I don't see any time this is going to end. Like, it doesn't seem like it's ever going to end.
Like, did people know that you were like taking pills and drinking? Were you like functioning, or was it obvious that you were?
I was pretty functional. Yeah. I mean, like you could tell that I definitely like wasn't okay. And people would ask me like, are you okay? And I'd like have to do these writing assignments for school where it would be about like a personal essay, and my teachers would even be like, are you okay? And everyone was just, are you okay? And I would always just say like, yeah, because that's what I was conditioned to do growing up in that church. It was like everyone around me was like just assumed that I was fine, and if I wasn't, my dad and my mom almost like expected me to just be like, yes, because that's how you do it. That's how you just live your life. You're always fine.
Well, it sounds like they put like shame on not being fine.
Yes, that was a big thing.
So you're in this period where you're in high school still, you're grounded. How long does this last? Like,
so I got grounded in like the first or second day of December. I remember it so vividly because there's nothing else for me to do but like remember this. And I ended up getting ungrounded in May. But I wasn't really ungrounded. I just was allowed to have visitors because I had gotten hospitalized. And so that was the only reason that they had technically like ungrounded me. It was never like you're free to go do whatever you want. It was actually like a few more months after that they were like, okay, like we trust you enough now. But I'd gotten hospitalized for like a number of different things, but what got me there was the drug use and the eating disorder and the smoking. I like was not taking care of myself in any regard, and it just kind of like snowballed and got really, really bad.
So on your eating disorder,
yes,
that was like, that stemmed from you wanting to just control and like finding something to control.
Yeah, so I think at the root of it was control, and that underlying symptoms were insecurity. I was insecure about why I wasn't able to be trusted in a lot of different regards. People had made fun of like my eating habits growing up and had said like different things and made comments about like my body, and it never really like clicked that I could do something about it until I realized like one day like I hadn't been hungry all day, and my parents had made me start going to counseling, and they prescribed me Adderall, so I was abusing that, and I was never eating. And I like looked in the mirror one day and I was like, whoa, like this is what I've always wanted to look like. And so it just kind of like, it got really toxic very fast. And yeah, it did stem from that idea of like, at least I can control like what I look like. I can control the way that people perceive me. Like, I may not be like the smartest girl or the prettiest girl, but I can be the skinniest girl.
As you got skinnier, were you getting positive reinforcement?
Absolutely. And my dad did not make that any better. He had always kind of like teased my mom about her weight. And that was something that I had picked up on from a very early age. So like in my mind, I'm thinking skinny equals pretty. So if I'm skinny, then I'm pretty. And that also means that I'm going to be getting acceptance from my dad. It was always like, I just wanted love and acceptance from my dad, I think, for a very long time.
You get hospitalized for your eating disorder and for the drug use.
Yes.
Like, at this point, are you saying, okay, now it's a problem? Are you aware of it? You don't care? Like,
yeah, so I kind of think it's a problem, but it's not anywhere. It's like this, there's this lie that happens when you have an eating disorder where you're like, I'm not sick enough. Even if they're like threatening to give you feeding tube, you're in the hospital, you're on bed rest. My body was physically shutting down and my organs did not have enough nutrients. I was losing my hair. I didn't have my period. My body was so swollen because it was like just trying to hold on to like water weight and like different things, but at the same time like I was just so sick looking. And even then I was just like, I'm not sick enough. I'm not. I had gotten really good at manipulating people by that time, so I just did what I needed to do. I finally got to the place health-wise where they were able to discharge me, and I was supposed to go into treatment for PTSD because I had gotten some PTSD from just like the experiences that had played out with my dad. I got diagnosed with severe anxiety, depression. I had got diagnosed with obviously that eating disorder, and I was physically super sick. So I had bronchitis and pneumonia at that time too. So it was just like accumulation of all of these things, and they had given me like a bunch of medicines and put me on bed rest for an extended duration of time. And I also had gastritis because of my eating disorder. My stomach kind of like started to digest itself. It was like, it had gotten like pretty bad, and I just didn't realize how bad it was.
At the time before you were hospitalized, were you not eating anything?
No. I would eat when people would force me to, but I would sit there and I'd cry about it.
So people noticed and were like, hey, you need to eat. Why are you not eating?
Yeah. And when you're looking for attention, doesn't matter if it's good attention, bad attention, you just want attention. I'm like, okay, if this is giving me attention, why am I going to stop doing this in the first place?
Are you getting positive attention at school for being skinny and like prettier or whatever it is?
Yeah, definitely. And then from my dad, my mom was the only one who was like genuinely concerned, and my grandma was super concerned.
But your dad's saying, you look great.
Yeah, she looks fine. This is normal for girls her age. She looks completely normal.
Did they know that you had a drug problem?
Not really.
Okay, so they knew you weren't eating, but they didn't know about the drugs.
Yeah.
When you get hospitalized, you said they gave you a bunch of medicine. Was it like antibiotics or was it medicine that you could get addicted to?
It was like antibiotics and like painkillers.
Okay.
So for a long time while I was in the hospital, I was on morphine, and that was when I was like, oh, like this is a big boy drug. Like this is different than anything I've ever tried before, and I think I really like this.
So then you get discharged from the hospital. You're telling everyone that you're fine.
Yeah.
They give you pain medicines and antibiotics to go home.
It was more for like my cough. So I ended up getting prescribed codeine. It's like a depressant. So it is like a painkiller, but it also suppressed my cough. That way, like, I wasn't going to pull a muscle in my stomach or anything like that. So I started like drinking that, and then it slowly went from like using this appropriately to, wait, I realize now like I can get intoxicated off of this. And so I started using it more recreationally. And so that was like my first real like, I'm addicted to this thing. That and Xanax. I would take those too.
Now you're done with junior year. And then you're just maintaining this level of still having the eating disorder, but better at hiding it.
Yeah.
Doing the drugs.
Yeah.
And now you're like addicted to this.
Yeah, I'm like addicted to Adderall, Vyvanse. I'm addicted to Coke. I was doing so much Coke. I was doing Xanax. I was doing just like random stuff like GHB, which is like literally a date rape drug when mixed with alcohol. Like I would just use anything. It wasn't really about like what the substance was. It was, am I going to be on something? And I don't think like, I probably had like maybe 3 or 4 days out of that entire year where I was like not on something.
Wow.
Yeah, so I was always smoking. I was just doing something, whatever it was something. I'm actually still dating this boy at that time.
So after you get ungrounded, you guys get back
together. So we're dating. It's so toxic because I'm also like seeing the way that like my dad treats my mom, and I'm like, that's also what a relationship looks like. So he calls me names and I'm like, yeah, like go figure, like that's relationships. They just like secretly hate you. And so I'm thinking like this is love.
When you first started dating him though, you weren't like doing the drugs or like that.
No. So he was with me, seeing me evolve over like this period of time, and he didn't know what was wrong with like the way that I was acting, why I was acting so weird, why I was doing things like that he never thought I would do. And it was just like, he actually had no idea.
He didn't know you were doing drugs.
Not really. Like he knew I was smoking weed and like I do drugs like every once in a while. He didn't know it was like an actual problem though.
Wow.
Been dating him at this point for like 2.5 years, almost 3 years. So we finish out senior year and I'm going into college, still dating him. Going into that new year, I ended up breaking up with him, and this was in 2019. What I thought was going to just be like this big change in my life, and like it's time to like be better and like boss up and like do the things that I need to do in order to like be successful, and like I'm going to finish school. And because of my codependency issues, it just didn't really work out that way.
Yes. So what does that mean?
So what that looked like during that time was attaching myself to like certain friends, and it didn't matter if I was like in a relationship. I just always had to be talking to somebody. Like I needed to have people around because I didn't want to be alone with my thoughts. I couldn't face the things that I had like put myself through, or face the things that like I had problems with, and I just didn't know how to like console myself.
At this point, now you're in college, has anything changed with the drugs? Or are you using them the same way that you were?
I actually slowed down for a while. Yeah, I didn't use hard drugs the way that I used to. My senior year was like pretty bad, but going into college, it was like, this was like not very bad for me. It was like Coke every once in a while, and like I drank like maybe like 3 or 4 times a week, which was still not that bad to me. And I definitely had slowed down. And I'd still smoke weed every day, but it was like different. At that point, I was so used to smoking weed, it was like what made me like normal. Yeah, I like had slowed down in a lot of different regards, but I still definitely had like issues.
And you're in college, at what point do you drop out?
So it's like March-ish. And I have this really close friend, and he went to like boarding school in Australia, and his friends come from Australia, and I'm like really close with this group of people. We all hang out all the time, and like because I have school, I've like such a busy schedule. I have just such a hard time like hanging out with them. And so I just decided one day, I'm like, I don't want to go to class today. I just like want to hang out with my friends. And then I just kind of like stopped showing up. So my friend that went to boarding school in Australia, he has family out there. He ends up saying like, oh, I'm going on like a trip out to Australia. And I'm like, I want to come. I spent about a month there. Part of the time I'm working on a farm. Part of the time I'm like partying in the city, and I'm like going to clubs. And with that came like the drugs that they do over there. So I got into ecstasy while I was over there, and I tried like ketamine and just like these different drugs that I'd never tried before. On the flight back, I had a layover in Sydney, and I went out one night and I actually got drugged.
What do you mean a layover in Sydney? Like a day layover?
So my mom was a flight attendant, and we had like standby seats. And so we ended up being there for like 2 extra days in Sydney. We weren't even supposed to be in Sydney, but we were like, might as well like explore the city, have fun. We go out, and like he gets too drunk. I take him back. I go out again. I get drugged.
Where do you end up?
I woke up in a the presidential suite of a hotel. Somebody had paid for a hotel suite, and I woke up with them on top of me. And that was like really scarring. I woke up and my nose was like gushing blood, and I started like bawling and like hitting the person and like telling them like, get off. I didn't have my phone. So I had lost my phone, my passport, my wallet, like everything I went out with, I did not have anymore somehow. The only thing I had was like this jacket that I wore, and none of my personal items were in that jacket. So I was just kind of like lost. I was in the middle of Sydney with like, I literally didn't know where I was. And he called me an Uber to my hostel. Luckily, I like remembered the name. And so they bring me to the hostel, and I like remember like sitting in the Uber and asking the Uber driver, do a lot of people around here get drugged? And he was like, no, like you should definitely go to the police if you think that you got drugged. And so I ended up going to the police, and they wrote me off as like a drunk American girl. We go to the U.S. Embassy. I spent all day there. We end up staying an extra day. We fly out of there, and then we get home. That just was kind of like straw that broke the camel's back in some senses with like the relationship I had with my dad. So when I get back, I am such an angry person just at like the way I felt like life had mistreated me, and like I had like everything but nothing at the same time. I just like get really irritable and like snappy. I end up just being like, again, caught in this idea of escapism. So I book a trip to Mexico. So I just like could not stay put. It was like I didn't care how. I just wanted to escape. And so I'm in Mexico, drinking the entire time. I get back from Mexico, and me and my dad set aside time to like go to dinner. We haven't like really talked or spent any time together in months. And we get into this big argument, and he kicks me out. So I'm kicked out now at this point, and I'm couch surfing. And so I end up moving in with the person I went to Australia with.
You were living with your friend and his parents.
Mm-hmm. They say like, you can have a room here for free. Like the only condition is you work or you go to school. And I'm like, okay, like I can totally do that. And I like am using stimulants a lot because I'm not sleeping, and then I need to stay up all day because I have a job that's like 9 to 5, and I end up getting fired from my job because I very clearly am not stable, and they just don't want someone like that working for them. So I'm thinking like, oh, I love music. I love singing. I want to go to music school. I want to learn how to play more instruments. They told me like, I don't think like that's a good avenue for you. It's not very likely to be a successful thing for you. I start going to cosmetology school because that's what they suggested. They said, oh, you like creativity, like this is creative and it's consistent in money and like stuff. So I started going to cosmetology school, and around this time I met somebody and we started dating. Like pretty serious, like quickly, because I pushed for that. Again, like codependency issues. So I had a lot of just like things that I felt other people needed to prove to me about myself. So like I wanted to prove like through them being there that I'm like good enough.
Is he using or no?
No, not really. So we would just smoke together, and because I was around him and I like cared about him and like different things like that, like I didn't really use drugs. He became my life. Like I got so absorbed in like him that I stopped hanging out with like anybody but him. Like he was all that really like mattered to me. I just replaced one addiction with another, and it was just a person that time. So I would lie about things that I literally had no business lying about. It'd be over like stupid stuff where I just felt like I needed to protect like this one little thing, or he'd be mad at me and like break up with me and just all these different things. And that was never the case. I just had made myself feel that way because of the way that my parents were.
Well, it was ingrained in you to be sneaky and to lie about things you didn't need to lie about because they were so strict.
Yeah. I end up moving in with my boyfriend at the time's friends. So I'm sleeping on their couch. I think he was like, oh, whoa, like she's really in my life now. Like she's in my life. And it wasn't like we were a part of each other's lives. It was like I had just come into his life. They end up kicking me out, and he breaks up with me in the same weekend. I will never forget this phone call. I get this phone call, and I'm at my friend's house, and I was a mess at this point. I was like drinking a lot. I was super underweight and I wouldn't eat anything, so I'd get like incredibly intoxicated. And this night I had passed out and threw up all over myself, and people showered me. I remember waking up that morning and expecting to like see a text or a missed call or something from him. And I'd just gotten kicked out like the day prior, and I was like, I really don't understand this. And so I call him and he answers and he's like, hey. And he like answers on the first ring, like he's been trying to figure out something to say. And he breaks up with me over the phone, and he said that I suffocated him. And so at that point, I'm like, oh, I just proved myself like right again, like I'm a burden. Like no one wants me around. I just like flew off the handles. And during that like time, my eating disorder got so much worse. I started taking ecstasy just for fun, and it'd be like a Tuesday in my friend's room, and I'd be like, time to take some ecstasy. And my mom asked me like that year, she was like, can you go to rehab? After I'd gotten broken up with, I was like, okay, it's time to like resolve this trauma of me being drugged and like this extended like period of stress. And like clearly I have like issues with eating. Like this needs to like be, dealt with, because she saw I was having like a lot of trouble. I'd cut my hair into a mullet. Like I just was not myself.
How long are you there? Does it help?
I'm there for about a month and some change. COVID had just started. So like this was like March 19th was the day I went in, which was the day that the lockdown started. And it was also my mom's birthday. So I go in that day. I'm not allowed to have any visitors. I'm not allowed to I was under like 24-hour supervision for like a really long time while I was there, and they wouldn't let me like I couldn't flush the toilet by myself. Like someone else had to like watch me flush the toilet. Like it was really like I felt like someone was literally breathing down my neck the entire time that I was there, and I hated it. So I played the game and I got out as fast as I could. There was no like outpatient program that I really wanted to go to, and I'm like, I can do this myself. And so I'm thinking like I'm gonna be fine. I'm not gonna like go back to doing like drugs the way that I was doing them. Like I'm gonna be completely good.
Did you feel okay sober?
Yeah, I actually felt great sober.
This is the first time you're sober in like 4 or 5 years.
Pretty much, yeah. So I felt good. I felt like way smarter. I'm like, I have like so much more capacity to my brain. I have just like, I'm quicker on my feet. I can think better. And like I had done some damage to like my brain, obviously, like using drugs for like that long. So I felt like it was like kind of coming back to me, like motor function. And like I had stuttered, and it kind of took away my stutter for a little bit. There were just like things that I was like, I didn't even realize that was a problem. And I genuinely felt good, but there's something that always like kind of lingered in the back of my mind. Like, I wish I could like smoke a bowl right now. And like, I wish I could just like be smoking. Like that was like the big thing for me, was like weed. Like I loved smoking weed. So I was like, I'm probably gonna like not quit smoking weed, but like I'm gonna quit doing other drugs.
And did you feel like you had any healing there with like your traumas?
I felt like I dealt with some of them, but others of them, I feel like you can never really tackle things the way that they're intended to be tackled with the absence of God. And that was something that was like a missing piece, is like God wasn't involved in it, and it was being attacked from a medical standpoint. And so they were like giving me all these diagnoses, and they were giving me all these band-aids to like put over it, but it's like a band-aid's not going to fix a lobotomy. And that's what I felt like they were doing, is like masking just this big cavity of space that obviously needed to be filled by something, but it was a God-sized hole that needed to be filled by only God. So in some regards, yes, but in a lot of other aspects, no, it didn't really do anything for me.
So when you get out of rehab, then what?
I get out, I smoke weed, and then I relapse on my eating disorder. And it was like a slow relapse, because you compromise in one area, and then it's like once the devil has foot in one area, he can like get all the other areas. And so, yeah, I like found myself compromised in that area, and then it totally just went south. I started befriending like the wrong people again for a good like 6-7 months, I wasn't doing anything but partying. It did not matter what I was doing. I would do acid, ecstasy, mushrooms, like all of them, and I'd be like all in the same week. I just could not care any less about like myself. And it's like it had gotten to a place that I took myself off my medications, and I was like super suicidal. I was like incredibly promiscuous. At this point, I had started dating this girl. Like I had like a relationship with this girl, and like I had like explored my sexuality, but like not like this. It was like an open relationship, which is super weird. I never wanted to be in anything like that ever. And it was like once I like compromised like my idea of like what a relationship looks like, it just was like, okay, like this is okay, like we're just gonna do this, I guess. And so I had just this whole new avenue to be promiscuous in, and I was just like sleeping with new people all the time, and it was just this insatiable thing where it was like I never felt like I was enough, so I had to just like obtain things. And especially with like the same sex relationship sort of thing, it's like I didn't have to compete with them if I could just like be with them, you know?
Were you attracted to girls?
Yeah, at the time I was, but I think it was like I was always going after girls that like had something different than I did. So I think it stemmed from a point of insecurity. It was like their boobs are bigger than mine, and like it was just like very like physicality. And it was like I almost went for girls that had like what I wanted. I get attached to like certain people because I wanted to just be loved. I would like search for anybody who would like give me like the time of day, and like if they seemed interested, I'd be all over it. And I'd take up, I would just like flirt with anybody and everybody. And it didn't matter if I actually liked them. I just had this like intrinsic need to like be wanted by everybody. I had just gotten like super like lost and in this idea of like I don't really know how this is gonna end, but like I know like I'm not gonna end up here one day.
How does it stop?
Obviously, like I was using drugs like very heavily, but I had these like intense moments where I'd find myself like alone, and I'd hear like these things where it'd be like, you either stop and you live, or you continue in this lifestyle and you die. And I thought it was like myself telling me this, but like I later found out like it was God, and like that was how like all this ended up ending, was like I was going to kill myself because I just didn't see an end to any of it, and I just didn't want to live like that anymore. And I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't function. Yeah, I was just like a literal shell of a person, and I was just killing myself slowly anyways. I'm like, I'm too much of a coward to just like actually do it. Like, why don't I just kill myself? Like, just put myself out of my misery.
So you decide, what's the point of living? This isn't going to end.
Yeah.
Do you decide to like consciously kill yourself?
Yeah. I don't have a plan yet. I'm trying to figure out the plan, and I can't get this woman's name out of my head. I kept hearing like, call my mom's friend, and like I kept hearing it over and over and over again. I was like, I'm not calling her. Like, I'm trying to think of how to kill myself. Like, why do I keep thinking this? So I end up calling her, and she takes me to church for the first time in a very long time the next day. And that was when like things just started to like kind of change. So this was in November of 2020.
What happens that day?
So that day, I genuinely have no idea what he said. I was in psychosis during that time, so I was just like thinking literally everyone was like watching me and following me and like after me, out to get me. And that was like the first time in like maybe a week that I'd felt like any like peace outside of like drug use. Like that was the first time I'd been like mostly sober in a while, and I felt like almost instantaneously sober, like coming into like that area and that space. I just kind of was like, I don't know, like shocked by like what I was feeling, and I didn't anticipate it at all.
Were you hesitant to go to church after the experience you had with your previous church and your dad being a pastor?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was genuinely terrified. I thought like, this guy is a liar. Like the whole time he was like talking, I'm like, something in the back of my mind was just egging this idea on, like, his daughter's gonna end up just like you, and just like all this stuff. And I'm like, dude, like, shut up. And I like couldn't quiet my mind. Like my mind was just so active, and I realized like it was because I was letting these thoughts that the enemy was like putting in there to just run my mind and just take over. They weren't like my thoughts. They were just like the enemy, like hanging out in there, just kicking it around with all these different thoughts.
So when your friend or your mom's friend told you we're going to church, were you like, okay, sure?
I had nothing else to do, and it was like I either go with her or I'd literally sit at home and like use drugs.
Okay, so you go, you think he's probably a fraud and it's stupid.
Yeah.
And then why do you go back?
I just felt like I was supposed to be there. I'm like, I don't know. I honestly don't know why I went back. I think like God will steer like your heart in a certain direction when he knows the desire of your heart. He definitely heard like my heart's cry. Like there were times where I'd be like bawling because I didn't want to go out and I didn't want to do it, and I'd dry my tears and I'd put on my makeup and I'd put on an outfit and I'd go out. And it wasn't that I wanted to be out, it was that I didn't know what else to do with myself. And I think like God like genuinely heard the cry of my heart, and he was like, she is desperate. She desires to know more. Like, because I just would sit there and I'd lay awake at night and I'd be like, there has to be more. Like, there has to be more in this life. Like, I didn't want to wake up one day when I was 30 and just like look back on like the years and just see like what I had been doing for the past 6 months extended over a 10-year period of time, because I knew people like that. I saw like what it did to them, and they hated themselves and they hated their life, and they had kids that didn't know them, and they just were like, they were like walking zombies. Like it was just never something that I wanted, really.
At what point do you get saved?
So I had gotten saved. I raised my hand like that the first Sunday I was there, because I just like knew, I'm like, this is maybe like what I've been looking for a very long time. And so that Sunday I raised my hand, and I think it was the following week I got baptized.
And at what point do you say, okay, I'm going to stop using?
I couldn't stop. Like I genuinely couldn't stop, and it like took like the surrender to the Holy Spirit to like really get me to stop, because my flesh nature was like rampant. Like it was running, and just it was so much louder than my spirit's conviction.
So you wanted to stop, but you didn't have any self-control.
No. And it reminds me of like, there's this verse in Romans 8, and it's like, if I desire to like stop sinning and like I can't stop sinning, it's not I who continues to sin, but the flesh that dwells within me, or something like that. And it is like one of my favorite passages, because it just really reminds me of like learning how to like lean on God and trust God during that time. It was a process, but it was like all like graced by God. I didn't have any withdrawals when I quit doing drugs, which is crazy. I'd stopped really like hanging out with the people that I was hanging out with, and I just like made this decision. I'm like, I'm gonna go sober. I'm gonna be sober.
What's happening to your eating disorder?
I got prayer this one day, and it was, I think, the 6th or the 7th of January, and I haven't had issues with eating since. And it was like this thing that I'd struggled with for almost like 10 years. It started when I was like really little, but it was like more innocent. I did not realize it was an eating disorder. It just like vanished. And it was like the power of the Holy Spirit just like completely took it away. And I think like when you struggle in something, God gives you the authority to rebuke that sort of issue. And I got prayer from somebody who had dealt with and had overcome those things with the help of God. So, yeah, I was like completely freed from that in that moment, and I was completely fine.
Are you struggling with it at all now? Like, do you still have temptation?
So just coming out of that lifestyle, I had like almost like an addiction to like sex, which was like completely eradicated. It was like I just did not want to have sex. I did not want to like, I just like wanted to be like good. And by good, I mean, I'm not saying like, I personally felt like it was what I needed in order to just like grow closer to God. That was something that I had to like set myself apart in, was like now being like celibate. And with hard drug use, I had the worst experience the last time I used. I started like, I got really like sick, and I was in the desert, and there was like not really any way for me to like get what I needed. I was so cold and I like had started throwing up, and that was the last time I used a hard drug. And so it was like, oh, well, I've had such bad experiences with this. I never want to use hard drugs ever again. So those two, it was like immediately stopped. With weed, it was a little harder for me to stop, and I'd slip up in some areas. And then with alcohol, because I never really considered myself to have a problem with it, that was the hardest thing to really cut out outside of nicotine.
And then the eating disorder just broke off.
And I haven't had any issues since. It's not meaning that like your attacks in the mind don't go away, but it gets easier to overcome them. It's like I'm just like able to shut down those ideas a lot faster because I have the tool of taking my thoughts captive.
Now too, it's like a different value system to say, okay, I know what is good for me and this is not good for me, or this is not of God. And so you have a different system to say, is this my thought, the enemy's thought, God thought? Yeah. So you're doing Bible college, yes, going from like the darkest of darkness to now being fully submerged in light, pastors constantly pouring into you, holding you to a different standard, higher than most people. Yeah. What is that experience like for you?
It was really hard. And I think like that's something that I haven't really like talked about it. It was a lot of hard work, especially like I feel like God like healed my brain because I fried myself. Like I was very slow in a lot of different regards. I had a lot of pride, and like that's something that God still like works through with me in certain areas, but nothing like I used to have. I was like I was my whole identity. I like had to just be the best at everything, and God has really just worked since the beginning of that experience on pride and insecurity. He's just like revealed to me like I'm made in his image and I'm very unique, and who I am is not going to be what the next person is, because even though like we're all believers and we're all a part of the same body, we all don't have the same function. Like my arm doesn't have the same function as my liver, and that's something that like I had to learn through like just reading and spending time in the Word of God, and just like praying through.
What happens to like this whole time you've had this belief of I'm not good enough, I have to make my dad love me? How does that relationship start to heal? And how does your mindset start to heal towards that?
Yeah, so I kind of just learned I learned that I don't necessarily have to respect my father as a person, but I can respect him as a parent and honor him in the ways that a parent deserves to be honored. So just like God has just been like teaching me like what the real meaning of the word father is, and how like he is my earthly father, but God is my heavenly father, and giving me a true sense of what love really looks like. And through like spending time with God and like spending time in prayer and spending time with like people who are constantly pouring into me, it gives me the opportunity to come back to that relationship with more grace, with more patience, with more faith that God can change things, with more ambition to shift the area that like that relationship is flawed in. So even now it's like not the best relationship, it's not perfect, but it's so much better, and we don't argue about things, and we just, when we do discuss stuff, it's all about God, which is really cool. It's like definitely a God-centered relationship, and like I feel like my dad doesn't even perceive me in the way that he used to, and it's by the grace of God. Like God has totally just healed the perception aspect of who I am to my dad.
There's obviously a huge transition from where you were last year to now. Mm-hmm. Like, what has God been doing in you?
Over just like the year, God has just been like kind of refining my perception of people and my perception of myself. And he's given me the true meaning of what it means to be submitted. I think for a really long time, I thought like you just follow the rules and like you do a good job and then you'll get a like star sticker and you'll be good. And it's not like that at all. God doesn't want you to follow rules. He doesn't want you to try to be your best. He wants you to understand that you can't be your best without him. And so I've just been kind of like learning during this time, like especially, this is something that I think I'm never going to stop learning. I don't think you can ever graduate from this, but learning new levels of submission with God. So I just like keep submitting myself in like new areas and like understanding where I can improve, as a follower of Jesus. Can I spend less time doing this and spend more time doing this? What am I feeding myself spiritually? What are the things that I'm watching that are affecting my walk with God? I'm having these dreams. Why am I having these dreams? The people I'm around are influencing me. How can I change that and start influencing them with the Spirit of God? And so it's just kind of like learning how to allocate time properly to spend with Jesus without making it like, I have to spend time with him here or I'm going to be like screwed, even though I am. Like, I need to spend time with Jesus, especially in the morning because it fills me up. But I don't ever want it to become out of obligation or duty. I want it to just be out of like, I love God so much that I want to just spend as much time with him as possible.
It sounds like now you're getting filled up from him and like seeking not necessarily his approval, because we don't need to do anything for his approval, but like seeking love from him rather than from all these outside sources, friends, boyfriends, whatever they were. So you had said that he's taught you a new meaning of father. What is that meaning to you?
I think what fatherhood really is love. And God has been teaching me his agape love.
Can you explain what agape love is?
In the biblical definition essentially is everlasting love, sacrificing, free and unconditional love. You're never going to like do something to make like that person hurt you. And that was a big thing for me, is because like the way that my dad would react after I would do certain things, it felt conditional. And so the sacrificial bit, like I feel like there are areas that like my dad didn't sacrifice things that he cared about to ensure our well-being. And I felt like there was always like the love would run out at some point. And so I feel like God has just been reteaching me like that definition of love. And as he's doing that, like revealing to me like what it really means to be like somebody's daughter. And through that, it's mended my relationship with my dad. But God is like being just so patient and tender and like sweet in the way of like a dad would be, and just like cheering me on, almost like a kid being on the soccer field, and they're just like, come on, I know you can do it. And it's not, you didn't kick the ball hard enough, why did you miss that goal, or like anything like that. It's just like, I know you've got this, I know you've got this. And that's just kind of like what it feels like God has been doing, is like changing the way that I perceive fatherhood. People often forget no one loves your kid more than God loves them, and no one has their best interest at heart, truly, outside of the Lord. And like parents may, but like I feel like opinions get those intentions convoluted, and like they just kind of get watered down.
No matter how great of a parent you are, because there's a lot of amazing parents, but you're always parenting your child through your lens, whereas God doesn't do that. Like he has his lens, and your lens is created by the things that you experienced. And we're all broken people, right? So like there isn't a perfect parent or a perfect way of parenting, and everyone's going to make mistakes, whereas Jesus isn't. How has God worked in you for forgiveness towards your dad?
It started with like kind of like crying out to God and being like, I can't do this without you, because you are the only way I'm going to be able to give this man grace. He has hurt me. He has betrayed me in ways that I feel that are unredeemable, and I genuinely don't know how I'm going to be doing this without you, God. Like if you're able to do anything, you can change my heart to forgive him. And I feel like doing that, like realizing like I can't forgive without God, like truly forgive without God. And hate is just going to poison and ruin my relationship with God, that was when I was kind of like able to start that path.
This is very widely talked about, but when you're holding on to anger and bitterness, like, it's not affecting your dad, it's affecting you. And it's when you're holding on to that bitterness, it's really hard to really experience joy and like these other fruitful things because it's holding you in this dark place. There are certain things that go beyond our power. Like, and that's a great testimony how like you spent however many years addicted, no self-control, seeing no value, and then literally in the matter of a day, a month, no, like it just didn't affect you that way. Yeah. And there's nothing, like, how do you explain that? It's just, there's nothing, I mean, even with forgiveness, it's like someone has mistreated you so badly. And our human nature is not necessarily like a great nature. Like, it's very easy for us to lie. It's like sin comes natural to us because we live in a fallen world. And so when someone's hurt you, especially like there's ego and pride and saying like, you don't deserve this, you know, and we become the judge and we want to give them the hurt that they've given us. So often, not everyone, but that's like the first case, a response that I think a lot of people go through. And so to say like, here are years of hurt and here's how it's like led me to all of these other paths of destruction, but you don't deserve this, but I'm going to forgive you anyways. Mm-hmm. The only way to do that is with something higher to help us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think even the idea of like forgiving yourself is hard, especially going down like paths like that. I think everybody has a hard time forgiving themselves for mistakes, and that too is also just like all from God. And like spending time in God's word, you can just see the things that he speaks over you, which helps to really solidify the identity that we have in Christ as believers, and especially as daughters. There's just so much white noise from the world that comes through, and it's so incredible how you can open up your Bible and seek what you just desire most, just like that peace in your identity, and God will just silence everything, and he'll bring you to just like this center, this level of like peace where you just know who you are, and you know that you're fearfully and you're wonderfully made, and that you're perfect in his image, and that there's nothing that you can do to separate yourself from the love of God. And it just kind of like makes everybody's opinion like no longer matter, because why am I going to listen to a 20-something-year-old girl who doesn't know much compared to like the God of the universe? And it's not to say that like people around me are like stupid. It's just saying that like my God is so much more than your words.
Yeah, that's so powerful. I also think, to like your point of forgiving yourself, that it goes to show if the creator of the universe can literally forgive you for the deepest, darkest, worst possible things you can do, things that like parents maybe don't forgive, or like human people like can't forgive. Mm-hmm. It goes to show like there is nothing that you can do that's like, it's not conditional. He loves you no matter what, like no matter how far gone you are, however bad you are, like the worst things that you've ever done, like it doesn't matter what you've done, he still loves you. And that's like literally what the agape means, unconditionally. Like there isn't something you could do to make him stop loving you and like want to redeem you and want you to come into his kingdom.
It's so hard to fathom, but like the God of the universe who knows everything chooses to forget. And it's not that you become like a new version of yourself, or that like you're just cleaned. For example, like a car, like it's not that the car is getting detailed, it's that you're getting a whole new car, and it's a new model, and it's a different model, and it's just like it's completely new inside and out. And like he keeps no record of your wrong. He doesn't even look at you and think like, oh, well, you know that one time like you got really drunk and you slept with that person. Like he doesn't think about that. He looks at you completely new, and he just is in so much like awe and wonder, and he like loves you. And like only us as believers can move God's heart, which is so cool. Like there's so many things around us that are like beautiful, and like you can look at the sunset and be like, that is like the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And he's like, you know, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen, you.
When you were talking, I was just thinking about how like a new mom, when you first like have a baby, and everyone tells you like you love your I don't have any kids, but I hear from all these moms, like, you love your child so much. It's a new love that you've never experienced before. And it's like in that moment of having your baby and holding it for the first time, like this new experience and this like love that is unlocked. And I feel like that like awe, like, wow, I created this human, is what God sees in us every moment of every day. Like the wow of like, this is my creation, and like this baby is perfect. And even though we're like adults, like he still sees us that way. Like, how has your perspective changed towards the life that you once lived, your father, like that whole other chapter of your life?
I think it was definitely difficult to go through at the time. Funny enough, I'm like grateful for it, because I think like it just is going to allow me to be able to like, I'm going to be a bridge to so many different people than I would have been before. The people who have lives like the one I lived need to be reached, and they can only be reached by people who have been in that environment. And I think God is going to use me in that area. So I'm definitely grateful for just the opportunity to even be able to like reach out to that demographic. And same goes for people with like daddy issues and just parental issues in general. Like, God is going to give me the opportunity to be able to bridge that gap, and people can understand that they can heal their relationship with their father. It doesn't always have to be estranged and weird. And it's not that like we have a great relationship, but it's 1,000 times better than it used to be. And that's only because of God. And I know it's only going to get better from here. And with like every other relationship, it doesn't stop with you. Like, your decision to say yes to God bleeds into every vein that you have in your life. So it's going to affect everything around you, all like your workplace. It's going to affect your friendships, your relationships in every regard. It's going to affect the way that you treat people on a day-to-day basis. It's going to affect the way that you act in traffic. It affects everything. It's not just going to stop like one day. That one day that you choose to like become a believer and you're like, hey, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven. It's so much more than that.
Well, and I think even with your relationship with your dad and like parental issues, like it gets to the point where it's like you can't change him. And it sounds like a lot of your life you were trying to change who you were to for him. Whereas like now I think you're at a point where it's like it doesn't matter if he approves of you or not, and he doesn't have to be a stellar person. It's irrelevant of how you see him and like how you treat him. That's like where you have control, is your thoughts and what you make things mean, and like how you are as a person. And how he acts really doesn't like matter. Yeah. Then once you like have that shield and the truth of what God says about you and believes about you, then like you have almost this shield and like this bubble of protection where like you're not seeking your worth. It doesn't matter like what anyone says to you or does to you. And seeking approval from anyone just doesn't matter, because you already have all of the approval you need.
Yeah, definitely.
So what would you say to someone who is struggling with addiction right now?
I feel like you can't inspire somebody to be sober. Their soul has to like desperately crave it. And so I would just say, if there is somebody who just craves to be out of that lifestyle and craves to, if you crave acceptance and you're looking in drug use and you're looking in other people and you're looking within yourself and you're looking into crystals and tarot and all of that stuff, you're never going to find the approval that you're seeking, because you're seeking approval from something that's fickle, from something that's going to change. And I would just suggest like find a church. And that sounds like so stupid. And I swear like I know that's the last thing people like in addiction for the most part want to hear, because they don't want to be wrong. I hated being wrong. I hated being proved wrong. It was the worst thing in the world. But wouldn't you hate to end up being right? I guess I would have hated to be right if like that was all that life was. I would have hated that. I would have hated to be stuck with the truth that addiction isn't bad and it isn't real. I would have hated to be stuck with the truth of just being sick and being never enough and being hated by myself and the people around me. I would have hated the truth of being stuck with the idea that lying and manipulation is okay and chasing people that I loved away from me, I would have hated to be stuck with that truth. So all that being said, I would just suggest that like you find a good church, and God is the truth. God is truth. He is love. He's provider. He's protector. He is father. He is so many things, and he can be anything that anybody needs at any given time. And so I would just suggest like really leaning into God will provide peace, and that will provide love, and that will provide the security that like anybody who's in addiction is really like looking for.
Well, and I think that you can only build on solid rock. And all these other things may look like rocks, but like they end up just being sand. And when you build on something that's not solid, it's just like every time you lay your foundation, it's just going to keep crumbling over and over and over again. I think a lot of Christians end up at Christianity because they've tried to build on all these other things, whether it's drugs or alcohol or sex or like a relationship. None of these things, like all of these things change with the seasons. They change moods. Like when you're relying on a human or like the weather or the outside source, it's going to change. And every time it changes, the house starts to crumble. And so like the only consistent thing that doesn't change is God and what he says about you and what he believes about you and like what the Bible says. Like that stays the same.
That's so good. Yeah, definitely.
And what would you say to someone who is struggling with a relationship with their parents or like family?
So God is love. And I think when you don't know God, you perceive love in the avenues that you have received it. And so getting to know more of who God is will really heal any relationship, or it will reveal to you that that relationship should not be in your life anymore. And God will give you the grace to like be able to dissolve it. But yeah, it all just stems from like getting to know God better. I really believe like that is the best way to heal yourself and the relationship you have with yourself, the relationship that you have with your family, the relationship that you may have with a boyfriend or a girlfriend or whoever you're with, your friendships around you. You learn how to love better and love purely when you learn about the one who created love.
Us as humans, we're only able to love based upon how much we love ourselves and how we were taught to love, and like again through our perception of what love is. And a lot of people are not even capable of fully loving because they're struggling within themselves. And so when you are receiving a portion of love or like not the true agape love or not a true form of love, your idea of what love is can be man-made, like what a human thinks it is. And so when you do exactly what you're saying, like learn about God and learn about his love for you, not only does that not change, like there is no misperception, there's no like he created it, so he will give you the truth. And that's the like foundation of being a Christian, is like seeking truth.
I think a lot of people take things as face value and like take like the setting that they're in as just like the setting they're in, but they don't understand that there's a spiritual climate in any space that they enter into. And with that comes new attacks in different territories that are trying to be one spiritually. That starts with, I truly believe, like your family line. So like the things that you don't deal with, your kids are going to eventually have to deal with. So like I think my mom dealt with the same issues that I dealt with, like with an eating disorder, and maybe even like some of the stuff like with promiscuity, or like even my dad and my dad's side, like they've dealt with addiction, and the things that they didn't tackle and kill, the giants that they did not slay, were the ones that I am having to work through now. And God is teaching me that what you don't deal with today, your children are going to have to deal with years from now. And so it's giving me like so much more confidence and ease being able to surrender these like things in my life to God, understanding that I'm not able to deal with them on my own. and just like fully trusting that he's going to not only take care of it, but he's going to take care of my family. He's going to take care of my health. He's going to take care of my finances. He's going to take care of just my safety in general, the people around me, my friends, my loved ones. Everything is going to be taken care of in due time, but I have to trust that God is going to do it. And I have to do the work spiritually. I have to like till that soil to give God the appropriate ground to plant seeds in.
When you were struggling with addiction, it sounds like leading up to being saved, when you were considering like suicide, was like, well, what's the point of me existing? So now, what would you say your purpose is in life?
I think my purpose is just to like draw as close to God's heart as possible and to be a good follower of Jesus. Like, I genuinely don't think that I can go wrong with doing that, because the closer I draw to God's heart, the closer he'll draw to me, and he'll reveal his dreams and his visions that he has for me. I think as long as I'm like desperately pursuing him, I can't go wrong with it. And I think that will bring me like the most fulfillment. And that's my true purpose, is to just be like available and the best Christian possible. And that means going when he says go, and that means staying when he says stay, and that means sitting when he says sit, and standing when he says stand, and just being completely and utterly available in any capacity that he asks of me.
So you said you struggled with ego.
Yeah.
And pride. Because being a follower of Christ, like so many people are like, oh, well, it's just simple and you get like this excuse for like your life, but it's actually like so much work and doing things that are really uncomfortable. So it's like the ultimate act of obedience and sacrifice and like surrender. So how have you been able to surrender like and let go of that ego that you had before?
It's really easy as women to like get jealous of other women, which is very human. It's very fleshy, and people who say that they don't struggle with jealousy are probably the ones who struggle with jealousy the most. But I found that it's so much easier to just like physically, like literally say out loud, I am jealous of this person for this reason, and to start praying for them. And once you start praying for them, God is going to give you a heart for that person. And so it kind of just like releases you from that jealousy, because it's like anything that you give to God, the enemy can't have hold over anymore. So if the enemy is trying to like give you reasons to be insecure and jealous, once you give those to God, like he can't touch that anymore. So praying for the people that you feel envious toward, and praying for yourself, that like God will like reveal things to you about yourself that you never knew. And I find that like especially helpful, because you could be like, oh, like I really want to have like her nose or her body or like whatever, and God will be like, but no one has this thing of yours. And you'll just like learn to love like certain things about yourself that you never really noticed. And it's because God gave you like the love that he has for just like literally every little tiny piece of you. Like he cares about every part of you. And then in addition to that, like admitting to people when you are jealous of them, and like being like, hey, like, can I pray with you? Because this is something that's like bothered me, and I've already been praying for you and stuff. And like, I just want to admit it, because you get forgiven when you ask God for forgiveness, but you get freedom when you proclaim the things that he's forgiven you for and the faults that you have.
You were saying when you were in rehab, you're like, oh, I got this. Like, I will be able to stay sober. Does that ever come up for you of like, I want to do it my way over God's way?
No. I mean, like it had, like every once in a while it will, but like, oh my gosh, my way sucks. Like my way is so bad. If I was God, like everyone would be they would be in so much trouble. My way is so awful. And I know that because I've tried every single avenue that my way had to offer. And God has been really teaching me that there is no plan B. There's only plan God. And so I've just really like had to learn like, okay, like it's really your way or no way, because there's no way I'm going to be able to do the things that you've asked me to do without you. Like I can't be Casey out of my own strength, because that sucks. That is awful. And everyone hates her, myself included. But Casey with God is something that like is uniquely blessed, because God has ordained me to be a certain way and to function in an original design that he has literally like, he was weeping tears of joy while he was creating who I'm supposed to be. And so I don't want to deviate from that and I do my best to like not do that. And I know that that comes by like literally asking God permission for everything. And I'm okay with that.
Well, and I think too, if you're struggling with insecurities or jealousy or any of these things, to start praying for yourself to see yourself as God sees you, especially when you're struggling like with not liking who you are, because then you can start to see like you were created on purpose and like to love the things that were intentionally made. Okay, so your quote?
Yes.
Luke 6:27. To those who are listening, I say, love your enemies and do good to those who hate you. Why did you choose that?
Especially nowadays, everybody is like almost out to get each other. And so I picked that verse because it just really encompasses who we are supposed to be as believers. Like, we're supposed to be set apart. We're supposed to be separated from like who the world is. And especially now, there's just like this polarization between like love and hate, and like clearly hate doesn't work the way that everybody like anticipates it to. And I don't think like people really believe that hate is going to work. They just want people to feel as bad as they feel. I think this is really just challenging that, and you doing good for people who hate you and who wish you bad and who want to do you dirty and who want to see you fail. That's like the most Christ-like thing, is just like, even it encompasses the idea of like Christ literally telling God like, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing, when he's being crucified by them and they're laughing at him and spitting on him and calling him names and mocking who he is. Like, he still sat there and he was like doing good on behalf of those who hated him. And that's what we're supposed to be as Christians. We're supposed to be mini Christs. We're supposed to adopt who he is and get that full blessing of son or daughtership. And that's absolutely impossible without extending the arm of love and the arm of grace and the arm of forgiveness that Christ has towards people who even persecute us. We're just really called to be here and to love and do good to other people.
I think we live in a society that's very focused on me, and it's all about like, I'm going to do whatever's best for me or whatever I feel like in the moment, whatever feels good at the second. And I don't really have a regard for consequences or for how it affects anyone else. And like, just like really not caring. Like, even if we are conscious of how it may affect other people, like a lot of people just don't care if it's going to push them further in their career or whatever their agenda is. And I think that we've totally lost sight of love. And like, even in relationships, like how relationships are like, and how sex is and how all of these things are, it's just for instant gratification and money and greed and all of these like self-serving things that don't actually lead to anything good. And I've talked about this before, but like how fleeting all of these things are.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, what's the next thing? Mm-hmm. And then we find things to complain about and like things to be unhappy about. So I think that just like focus on our impact on other people and saying like, it's not about how other people are treating me. It's not about what they deserve. Like the quote of like, 2 wrongs don't make a right. It's like, it doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. If you can just make yourself proud and behave in a way that it doesn't matter, like you could have had the best day or the worst day, someone could have done the worst thing to you or the best thing to you, like that shouldn't change who you are as a person, your integrity, like how you behave, how you think, how you speak. Like, you should just know who you are and keep that consistent no matter what.
God even like stretches your capacity to be able to do that as a Christian, because we'll have like this box, right? And then God will put like something like right out here, and it forces you to grow that box bigger and bigger and bigger, because he knows like the things that you're going to need to be prepared for in the future. And like the level of patience that you're going to have and the level of forgiveness that you're going to have.
Okay, so if somebody listening wants to know more about you, wants to follow you, how do they do that? How do they follow your music?
And you can find my music through my Instagram. My Instagram is Casey, Casey.Conley, but the O is a 0.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on, and thank you for being so vulnerable. Stay up to date on the next release by subscribing and following us on Instagram at Main Character Collection, where you can also find the link to purchase the crew neck Casey designed. And as always, remember, your story has a purpose.